When I was first reading about this, my tiny little mind was exploding a bit because I just couldn't believe it. The treatment of transgender people in Western medicine has changed a lot since the diagnosis of transsexualism was first developed in the 1950s. Early attempts at treatment were psychological, talk therapy to try and resolve what appeared to be a mind-body disorder. Why do you think you're a man when you have the body of a woman, and vice versa? When more responsive, sympathetic medics got involved, there was a shift from psychological to physical treatments, and the priority became genital surgery. The logic was that once a patient underwent this procedure, they would effectively become their desired gender. Their sense of self may indicate the gender that they wished to be, but only genital surgery actually made it so. Fundamentally, your sex and your gender were what was in your pants. But this perspective didn't stand the test of time. As the decades rushed on and new and more radical ideas about trans identities and bodies began to emerge, one thing was clear. Sex was on the move. If you've never seen my face before, my name is Tallulah, my pronouns are they, them, and I sporadically share semi-academic brain dumps about gender, sexuality, and identity. If you're coming back to the channel, then welcome back, and thank you for sticking around. And if you're curious, many of the ideas and most of the history I talk about in this video are from the book The Look of a Woman by Eric Clemens. But now, let's get into the video.
Watch it, it's gonna move!
If doctors in trans medicine used to define sex solely by what's in your pants, then how do they define it now, and how did that shift ever happen? From the late 1980s, but especially from the 1990s and onwards, ideas about sex, gender, and bodies began to evolve in major ways, both in academic and activist circles. Judith Butler's gender trouble was a major touchstone in this evolution, disrupting the dominant theory and received wisdom about gender. They argue that gender is not an unchanging part of our identity, always tied to our body and dictated by gender, but rather it is a set of behaviours and aesthetics that we perform. And we don't perform them in isolation. We exist in relation to other gendered people, inhabiting bodies that have been given gendered and sexual significance. So in this way, gender is interpersonal. It's connected to how we see ourselves in relation to other people, and it cannot exist without social reinforcement. Meanwhile, transsexual activists, including those who would come to coin and popularise the term transgender, such as FEINBERG, were grappling with the lived reality of being a trans person, the demands placed on their bodies and presentation, the need to conform in order to be legitimate and safe from violence, often through attempts at passing, which was and still is a contested concept in itself. And a key idea that arose from both sides was the role of recognition. To what extent does being recognised as a man or a woman make you a man or a woman? Let's take a breather from the big gender rethink and cycle back to the state of trans medicine. You'll remember that the main concern of trans-focused doctors had become genital sexual reassignment surgery, now more commonly and casually referred to as bottom surgery. This isn't to say that the popularisation of bottom surgery had nothing to do with the demand from trans patients themselves. This obviously played a huge part. But from an institutional standpoint, it was bottom surgery that allowed a trans person to meaningfully become the opposite sex and gender. It's clear then that until this point at least, doctors considered sex to be a private affair, confined to the area of our bodies probably most often hidden from view. But medically categorised sex was about to move from the private body to the social body, and the way that this happened is a pretty wild story. And as if by magic, a day has passed. From the mid-60s until the late 70s, university clinics like the Stanford Gender Dysphoria Program were the leading providers of care for trans people in the US, albeit largely white middle-class trans people. One person who received treatment during this time was a woman named Candice, who had bottom surgery. But a number of years following her procedure, she went back to her surgeon with a pretty major complaint. She said that even though she found the procedure personally affirming and she was happy with the results, it had made no difference whatsoever to the way she was treated and perceived in the wider world. She told her surgeon that no matter what she did, how she dressed or carried herself, regardless of the fact that she was now medically and legally recognised as a woman, her social position hadn't changed. She didn't pass, and she wasn't recognised. And she realised that she was being betrayed by one thing: the bone structure of her face. Candice's lived experience brought two things to medical attention for the first time. One, that even if a trans person is comfortable with who they are, it is difficult to cope with a constant lack of social recognition. And two, that this goal of being socially recognised could become part of the medical domain. As you may have guessed by now, this is the story of the development of facial feminization surgery, more commonly known as FFS. The dilemma of how exactly to feminize a face was beyond the remit of the surgeon Candice had had bottom surgery with, so they enlisted the help of an expert, Dr. Ousterhout. Really don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, so we're just gonna go with Ousterhout and roll with it. Dr. Ousterhout had encountered trans patients before, but he wasn't a trans specialised surgeon. His speciality was, and bear with me here, cranio-maxillofacial surgery on the face, jaw, palate and skull. And while he was well known and well respected in his field at the time, nothing would compare to the status he now holds as the creator of FFS. While it was clear from Candice's experiences that the way a person's face is structured impacts the way that other people gender them, Dr. Ousterhout had to do a lot more than just develop a set of procedures. He had to create the medical categories of the male and female face, because fascinatingly, up until this point, there had been no medical differentiation between male and female faces. In his previous work, Dr. Ousterhout had focused on his facial reconstruction surgeries achieving functional, typical faces, and apparently these goals were not organised around sex differences. And so it was this one man who created, medically speaking at least, the male and female face. When I was first reading about this, my tiny little mind was exploding a bit because I just couldn't believe it. This one guy. Just this one guy! Drawing on a selection of resources, some of which were outdated and bizarre, such as early 20th century physical anthropology, studies of childhood orthodontic development, and a collection of dried human skulls, Ousterhout set about creating the parameters of the male and female face and developing the set of procedures we now know as facial feminization surgery. And it's also worth noting something that I'll come back to in more detail later, the fact that all of his research was based on white faces. During his career, Dr. Ousterhout performed nearly 1,700 facial feminization surgeries, and his blueprint remains the standard for facial feminization surgeons worldwide. But how does this connect to the location of sex? When Dr. Ousterhout first started performing FFS, he viewed it as an extra. Bottom surgery was still the most important thing, and the procedure that actually constituted a sex change. But over time, he started to see just how socially transformational FFS was for the women he operated on. He saw that for many of them, after surgery was the first time they were able to move through the world treated and recognised as women. And it's because of this that he started to believe that FFS alone could constitute a change of sex. The role of recognition here is huge. By his logic, the thing that makes you a woman or a man is when other people start to unilaterally see you and treat you as a woman or a man, and therefore whatever surgeries or procedures or steps you take to get to that place are the things that constitute a change of sex and gender. This marked a major shift in trans healthcare and led to the development of new kinds of procedures, both surgical and non-surgical. And somehow, against all odds, when I was leaving the cafe where I started brainstorming this video, I saw a huge sign outside of a skin and beauty clinic that was advertising feminization and masculinization procedures for trans people. The expansion of the category of sex from the private body to the social body has forever changed the way that medical professionals interpret trans bodies and the way they view the nature and goals of transition. The question I was left with when I first read about this story was, well, is this good? I had a few gut reactions to Ousterhout's huge influence over the medical interpretation of sex and gender, the first of which being, why has this one cis white man been given such profound authority over the bodies of trans people, and especially trans women? And it struck me as odd that he presents his ideas and the very measurements he used in his surgeries as objective and neutral, when in reality they are anything but. Most obviously, he completely bulldozes over the fact that in general, human beings are far more similar than we are different, and that even cis men and cis women often don't conform to idealized notions of male and female bodies. His research also focused disproportionately on the average faces of white men and white women, apparently not accounting for the fact that facial differences also occur across ethnicities. The privileging of white norms connects more broadly with the force of Western beauty standards, according to which white features are usually seen as more beautiful. The association between slim, small noses and feminine beauty is just one one of many examples of this. And this isn't just speculation. Dr. Ousterhout has willingly admitted that he wants to cater to beauty norms. He doesn't just want to create female faces, but beautiful female faces. And in the eyes of a white Western facial surgeon, the category of a beautiful woman is more than a little bit likely to be a racist one. But it was also clear that facial feminization surgery and the other facial options that have been developed for trans people are meeting a need. Nobody gets surgery for fun, and these procedures are affirming and life-changing for so many people. So I hope it's clear that the trans people who want or get any of these procedures are not the target of my criticism. My rage is reserved for a system that enforces cis-normative standards and places acceptance, recognition, and safety behind an arbitrary list of procedures. I believe that trans and non-binary people should have full bodily autonomy, be able to live authentically, and access any help that we need to feel like ourselves. Safety, respect, and recognition should be a given, a default from the outset, rather than privileges reserved for those who are trans in the right way. As usual, there is so much surrounding this topic that I just can't cover in one short video, so I highly recommend watching the ContraPoints video Beauty for a critical analysis of facial feminization surgery and also of Western beauty standards from the perspective of a trans woman. So after all that, I suppose the question to leave us with is this: where is sex going next? That's it from me today. I really hope you enjoyed the video and maybe even learnt something new. I'd love to keep the conversation going in the comments down below, so run forth and share the contents of your juicy brains. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!